Well, welcome everybody. If you'd like to get some more food or some more dessert, why don't you do that in the next, say 5 minutes. I'd like to welcome you. Actually, Carol Meade, our First Lady of Wyoming, was going to give the welcoming address, and she was unable to make it, so I'm going to read that address. But before I do that, I'd like to thank a few people who made this thing possible. Kay Persicity, our dean, is the person who found a very generous donor to provide money to make this literacy conference happen every year. And she insisted that we charge nothing, thinking that she wanted the college to give the teachers of the state of Wyoming and the Mountain West a gift of this conference each year. I'd also like to thank her assistants who were incredibly helpful in finding email lists all over the place and advertising the conference, and they did a pretty good job. This is actually a tremendously good turnout for the first night. Many people are coming from long distances and won't show up until tomorrow. I think I counted about 110 folks here, which is, I think, a great turnout on a Friday afternoon after you worked hard all week. I'd also like to thank Victoria Ridgway Gillis, our new endowed chair in literacy education, who contributed very generously also so that we could make the conference even more top shelf. And I'd also like to thank my sort of, what do we call them, my compadres, who worked to make this happen, making all the telephone calls, getting all the presenters lined up, getting the website, working with the people who got the website set up, and generated about an interest of about 170 people. I think by tomorrow morning we'll be up to about 170. And those two people are Steve Bialystock, who is on the literacy faculty, and Tim Rush, also on the literacy faculty. Audrey Kleinsasser and Heather Yates of the Wyoming School University Partnership were absolutely invaluable. They set up the website that you registered on. They continually allowed us to pester them to change things and add things and take things off, and we're very, very, very nice along the way, and I think put together a fabulous website that helped us get the word out well. Our office associate in secondary education, Judy Yates, those of you who are keynote or workshop presenters know that she worked very, very hard to make sure that all that stuff got set up. She got the name tags together. She chose the color scheme for the bags. She found those little lip balm as a token gift that we could put in the bags, and a whole bunch of other things. And I'd also like to thank a number of graduate students, some of whom were out there working registration, some of whom worked behind the scenes. And those students are Amy Spiker, Jessica Ford, Melanie Reeves, Heather Peterson, Victoria Simpson, Mary Wehunt, Debelina Matra, and Liz Gilbert. I don't know if many of you know this, but we've only had a doctoral program in literacy education for about 2 years. And the people that I just mentioned are in the doc program. They've been in the doc program for between, I'm going to say, 2.5 years and 6 weeks. And we're really, really excited about having such a great group here, and would encourage any of you who are able to get a PhD and would like to get a PhD, maybe work in higher education, once you've done what you want to do in schools, to apply to our program. And then finally, I'd like to thank the folks who are going to make this conference worthwhile to you. David Kirp, who will be talking in a few minutes, Dick Allington, who will be giving the keynote right after lunch tomorrow, and all of the workshop presenters. We have a really terrific bunch of workshops and a terrific bunch of people from all around the country offering those workshops to you. Let's give them all a big round of applause. Okay, well, I'm not going to cross-dress for this, but now I'm Carol Meade. Dear Fall Literacy Education Conference participants, actually, before I read this, I don't know if you know this, but also Dean Persicity had a number of conversations with Carol when she first became the First Lady, and about the Literacy Center. that we're trying to get going here, that we will get going here, and about the literacy initiatives we have around the state. And she decided that it would be her primary mission as First Lady to promote literacy and to promote the Literacy Research Center and clinic here on campus as what she's going to do primarily for the next few years. So we've been working actively with her. We'll continue to do that, and she's just a huge fan and sponsor of all the literacy stuff we're doing around the state. Back to the letter. It's my pleasure to welcome all attendees tonight and to offer my support to the University of Wyoming's Fall Literacy Education Conference. I am impressed with the activities of this two-day conference, which strive to provide practical classroom-based instructional strategies that are grounded in recent research in literacy education. I feel privileged to be able to support the literacy endeavors at the University of Wyoming, which focus on bringing together all of you to influence positive outcomes through empowerment, education, and mentoring. The benefits of this conference are far-reaching to our communities and to our state. The Governor and I feel that our children are the state's most precious asset. By your commitment to be at this conference, you are taking the steps needed to ensure a bright future for the children of our state. I wish you the best, and I know that you will be enriched after these 2 days. Thank you for your commitment to literacy and education in Wyoming. Highest regards, Carol Mead. Okay, Steve Bialystok, one of the other guys who helped put this conference together, is now going to introduce our keynote speaker for the night.
Before I begin, I was looking at the leftover food that's here and thinking about my mother when I was much younger. She would have been up there with a napkin and her purse. So if any of you want to recreate those wonderful memories of my leaving bar mitzvahs and behind, please feel free to, and don't say that I said it. David Kirp's biography of the conference program is something I lifted from his faculty webpage. But in order to make it fit the program, I had to cut a few lines. One of the sentences that I cut, and it was referring to his book, The Sandbox Investment, the Preschool Movement in Kids First Politics, says that it, quote, emerged from his spending several years crisscrossing the country, crouching in pre-K classrooms and nurseries. I can personally attest to the truth of this statement. In the 1980s, I was a kindergarten teacher and first grade teacher in Sacramento. At that time, David, on leave from his position at UC Berkeley, was writing editorials for the Sacramento Bee. We met at a luncheon, hit it off, became friends, and he came to visit my classroom on several occasions. I remember David sitting on beanbag chairs before the fire marshal told me to remove them. I saw him bouncing big round playground balls, and I had to demonstrate to him how to build Unifix Cubes trains. Secondary teachers may not understand that. David eventually returned to Berkeley, and I eventually went on to get a PhD. We stayed in touch for a while, lost touch for a while, and with the invention of the internet, connected again, but saw each other far too infrequently. I mostly stayed consistently in touch with David by reading what are now his early books. Learning by Heart, AIDS in School Children in America's Community was published in the late 80s, and it begins with the story of Ryan White, a little boy who had AIDS. Most people probably at certain ages don't know who that is anymore. But was a collection of linked narratives that describe reactions from community leaders, health professionals, lectures that range from demands for exclusion from schools to acceptance. Almost Home, America's love-hate relationship with a community, was a series of eloquently written essays that convinced me that an emerging academic didn't have to write about school concerns using unintelligible prose. I'm still trying to learn that. I also learned how the lives of people who have been marginalized and ostracized from their communities can't truly extract themselves from it. David writes in that book, "We hunger for stories. We are drawn to stories laden with moral meaning." David still tells stories. We drove from DIA here today, and we couldn't stop talking as we told stories. But now, I think David's stories have, arguably, greater urgency. When children are the focus of policy discussion these days, the conversation centers on how well students perform on the reading and math exams mandated by No Child Left Behind. No one doubts that these are critical skills, but mastery of those skills captures only a tiny fraction of what really matters in the lives of children. In his most recent book, The Kids First Agenda, The Sandbox Investment, Kids First Politics and Shakespeare, Einstein and the Bottom Line, Marketing of Higher Education, David proposes a system of cradle-to-college supports that hold the promise of changing the arc of children's lives. As we prepared for this conference, and my job was coming up with the keynotes, there was no question that one of them was going to be Dick Allington. We tried to get him here a couple years ago. And then I struggled and struggled and struggled. And I thought, who could we get who could be a comparable person for a second keynote? And I went days and came up with names and all sorts of stuff. And my colleague Michelle Buchanan and I were sitting together as she heard me sort of angst about this. And she said, "Why don't you ask your friend David Kirp? You've been trying to get him here for a couple of years." And I said, "Oh, that's not a bad idea." Thankfully, she was there to tell me this. It was an obvious choice. I'm pleased to introduce you to a man who was a wonderful writer, an academic, a teacher, a friend. Not so good a Foursquare player, however, David Kirp.
I don't know if I'm going to. Is this on? It's supposed to be. Can you hear me? Good. I don't know if I have as much to say about Kids First. Thank you very much for very generous. It's a pleasure to be here. What? It is on. Yep. Is that any better? I'm in your. Testing, testing. Yeah, got it? Okay. I've continued to crouch in classrooms. In fact, I've spent much of although the knees are getting creakier than they were 20-odd years ago, I've been hanging out in a little small city in New Jersey called Union City, which is the most crowded city and one of the poorest cities in the country. It's an almost entirely Latino community just across the river from Manhattan. About 3 miles as the crow flies from Times Square. I don't know if there are crows in Manhattan, but there were. That's how they got there. And spending a lot of that time in one third-grade classroom, but sort of roaming up and down the ladder from preschool through high school, and once again enormously impressed at the great things that great teachers can do, and attentive particularly to watching how kids learn to read, and many of these kids learning to read in a second language and learning to write in a second language. And one of the most amazing moments, I was Mr. David in that classroom, to figure out a name that wasn't, Mr. Kirp, like it wasn't David, so I was Mr. David, watching a group of these kids who came in that fall speaking and writing only in Spanish. And they'd begun learning English. And they went up to the teacher at Thanksgiving and said, can we write our next paper? They did a lot of writing, daily writing in their journals, in English. And she had been at this for a long time, was really surprised. This was about 3 or 4 months before she thought they'd be doing that. And so they did. And to listen to these kids reading in English for the first, and somehow it was gorgeous to see. I really became part of this class in a very emotionally bonded way. And the end of as I left for Christmas, the little surprise that they threw for me, which are these little essays about me. And at least this teacher and the other teachers in Union City pride themselves on giving kids exposure to a pretty rich vocabulary. And so this is the first thing that this boy had written in English, and he describes me in a whole bunch of ways, but the one that stuck out and the one that I sort of carry with me was that I was an elegant man. Elegant, that's pretty cool for a 9-year-old to Frank Kelly to have come up with. It's also the case, and I needn't tell you this, that teachers generally, and particularly teachers in the reading area, are in the crosshairs all the time. There is the fixation, and I guess I want to call it that, on literacy and numeracy has in many, many schools driven out a whole array of other subjects. Where did history and science and art and music go? And it's also extracted the joy out of a lot of the teaching of reading and literature, because what you're left with is that test and making sure that kids have got that test down pat. And so one of the things that I was looking for in my year in Union City was to see how very good people, very good teachers, could hold on to the joy while teaching stuff that was less than joyful. So I want to be clear, there's nobody on the planet that would say reading and math aren't crucial skills to have, but someday we'll figure out that they're not the only skills to have. And I needn't say that to you, because looking around the nods in this room, there isn't a teacher that I've ever met who thought you can just teach to this part of kids. You can just sort of inject them with narrow cognitive skills and not pay attention to other parts of their growing up, whether you're talking about preschoolers or you're talking about high schoolers. And I've spent time in both places, so I'm happy when we get to talking during the question and answer session. I do hope there are questions. You get season tickets to the football team, the UW team, for the first 5 questions, right, Steve? Something like that? Or some comparable prize. I had gotten interested in early education the way I've gotten interested in everything else in my checkered academic career, just by happenstance. I was taking a walk on a beach with a friend who said, there's this amazing study, this long-term study. Actually, it's an amazing study about preschool and its effects, and I'm old enough to remember, as some of you may be, the Head Start, the famous Head Start Westinghouse study with, the dread phrase, fade-out effects. So I, in all my, glory, said, oh, but fade-out effects. And he said, no, we've been following these kids for 40 years. 40 years down the road, you find huge differences in all the measures that you'd care to pay attention to. I come back to that when I talk about what it is that I think a system of support should look like. I mention that because that conversation led eventually to a book called The Sandbox Investment, and the Sandbox Investment got a lot of interest, attracted a lot of interest out there in the world. It was the right time to be paying attention to early education, and I think of the books I write not as an end in themselves, not as something that is going to get reviewed by a couple of scholarly journals and then we're done, but as a beginning, a kind of entry ticket to a national conversation. And so I was traveling around the country talking to business groups and community groups and teachers and politicians and educators and whoever else, and wound up being asked to serve in 2008 on President Obama's transition team, where I was responsible for early education in community schools. And I'm happy. This is, to me, one of the happy moments of the last several months in terms of policy is that there is now an early learning challenge grant inviting states to build the kind of system of support that I'm going to talk about. And I understand that Wyoming is in the process of developing an application for that grant. While I was there were 6 or 7 of us on the team. And we all had to pitch in, and we all had to hear from an enormously broad array of groups who were curious about this and that aspect, or passionate about this and that aspect of kids' lives. So it's parenting programs and education on the reservation and Catholic schools and reading programs and teachers' unions and charter school operators and child care specialists and pediatricians. They all came, 150 or so groups came to see us during those days. They all thought that we had some power. Wrong they were, but nonetheless they came, and we were in what's finally called listening mode, which meant also that we had to know something. So I had to learn very quickly about a lot of different issues, a lot of different areas of kids policy. And I came away from that experience thinking, these guys are really passionate about a slice of kids' lives. And reading is a slice of a kid's life. But where are the people who are passionate about the kid? From cradle to college. Who's thinking systematically about this? Who's putting the bits and pieces together? And so I traveled around the country, as I generally do. The way I learn about the world is by looking at things and finding things that are sort of interesting to see, going to places where I've been told good stuff is happening, and seeing for myself what that means. And so I spent the better part of a year traveling across the country. I mean, the barrios of Los Angeles, the borders of Texas. I was in a neighborhood in Chicago, so scary that the playground for the kids had barbed wire ringing the playground. And all of these programs passed what I decided was going to be my test for what ought to be. And my test it's the policy version of the golden rule. Every kid deserves the same opportunities to succeed that you'd want for a child that you love. It's a very, very simple idea. Every child deserves what you'd want for your child. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean if you're a very wealthy parent and you send your kid around the world into some fancy private college, that's, and whatever, and with tutors and, horseback riding lessons at age 4 and ski trips to, Jackson Hole maybe. Not that. But enough of a solid foundation from the beginning to give that child a chance to really succeed in life. And so the policy wonk in me, and as Steve mentioned, I teach public policy, thought, well, how can I turn that notion into an agenda that could actually be adopted? How can I think about what a system would look like that would accomplish that? And so from those travels and from that little aha moment about the golden rule, out of that there came this. which conveniently is sitting outside for those of you who are curious to know more. Kids First. And the book looks at 5 big ideas. 5. Why 5? Well, it's a list. Americans love lists, right? How do you know what college to go to if you're, U.S. News and World Report, let's look at our rankings. How did UW do this year in comparison to UT or, University of Idaho or, University of Arizona? David Letterman. Lists, right? We love lists. And you can, 5 is a nice number. You remember 5. I was looking for ideas that were, or strategies that were game changers, that were important, that were big strategies. I was looking for strategies that reached lots of kids, not just particular subset of kids. So there are really, really important, many, many important kinds of problems that I don't touch on because I was looking to see what kinds of universal supports would be of value. Now, it's clear to me and clear to most of you here that poor kids need the most. I mean, my working definition of poverty is that it means you have lousy choices in life. But it's also clear that kids generally need help, need support, need guidance, need engagement in kinds that often they don't get. So let me tell you what those 5 ideas are. Illustrate them a bit. Talk about how we might get from here to there. But in the meantime, I want you to be thinking about what else I can tell you that you'd find interesting, useful, relevant, either fleshing out some of the ideas or thinking about how you might make them happen or telling me that that doesn't make any sense or whatever's on your minds. I'm turning, you ask students to do this all the time, right? So just your students for a day. Idea number 1, strong parenting support. Now, I've talked to a lot of parents, and I've never met a parent who said, I don't need any advice from anybody about my child. I know it all. Just leave me alone. I can do it. Goodbye, grandma. Goodbye, auntie. Goodbye, pediatrician. I don't want to. No, I can raise this kid. I know everything there is to know. Parenting is a hugely complicated endeavor, and it's the most important, in terms of a child's life, it's the most important part of the child's life. We talk about parents being children's first educators, but they're second and third and fourth educators. And that's something, parenthetically, that I think school teachers forget. The farther up the grade ladder you go, the more parents start looking either irrelevant or nuisance-like in the story. And they're still out there. They're still connecting with their kids. So the program called Triple P, Positive Parenting Program, is just a paradigm of what it is that I had in mind. It's a system. It's a system changer. What I found when I was out in the field were lots of little, wonderful little programs, little things that you'd wish your kid was part of. But they weren't connected. They were scattered. They were random. They weren't hooked together. I remember a friend of mine in Illinois was taking a trip to Washington to visit his then young senator, and they bonded over oh my God, it's the 2 weeks between summer camp and the beginning of school. What do we do with our kids? So for many parents, it's not 2 weeks, it's 2 years or 3 years in which there's that gap between. There might be a really good Head Start program, but nothing before. Or there might be a great child care program, but no kindergarten, that's a full day program. Or there might, whatever. There are going to be holes in this agenda. We start with parenting. And what does Triple P do? the folks who designed this program and then went out and asked parents, what are the issues that you care about? You know, my kid can't sleep, isn't eating, is eating too much, is yelling, is fighting, is getting beaten up, you know, is doing terribly in school, is you name it. Sort of collected a list of these things and developed a series of strategies, ways that parents could deal with those issues, and then went out and tested them with huge field tests. Because what he was interested in was not a one by one, let's talk to this parent, but a way of parenting that lots of people could communicate. All those folks that parents really do turn to, the minister, the priest, the preschool teacher, the principal, the pediatrician, whoever, social worker. And those folks would get trained in this set of tools. It's like the docs who go off to Honolulu, you know, for their tooling up every year just to then come back and know more about being cardiologists. This is folks coming back and knowing more about being kid people. And then a lot of publicity in the community. The minister is going to stand up in the sermon. The 4-H club is going to sort of be announcing this so that people will come to know, and then parents will talk to other parents. And then you let the system go. Now, the data, when you look at game changers and evidence-based programs, the data isn't like 100 kids here, 100 kids there. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a great boutique parenting program called the Nurse-Family Partnership. But it's small. And the studies are 100 parents in Memphis receiving the program, 100 not. 100 in Denver receiving the program, 100 not. This sample is Brisbane, Australia gets the program. Sydney, Australia does not get this program. It's a population changer. It's not a one-by-one changer. In this country, it was 11 rural counties in South Carolina that were folks were trained and information made available, and 11 comparable counties where that didn't happen. And it was the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, that funded that study. And what they found, so they were looking for indicators of child abuse. They were looking at hospitalizations and foster care placements. Huge differences. You know, huge differences in terms of what those figures look like. And had they been studying reading readiness or many other things, they would have found similarly huge differences. I won't talk about many programs at that length, but I want to, to me, it's the paradigm first pillar of support program. And I want to talk about it for another reason. But I'm such an enthusiast about this. Nobody's ever asked me this, but I have no association with these guys except for the fact that I came upon them and think they're great and wish they did a better job of marketing themselves. It's cheap. When I was producing a budget for this, I went back to these guys and said, how much are we talking about per parent? $15 a parent. So even in these budget-straitened times, it's possible to think about triple P as something one can do. Item 1, strong support for parents. Item 2, really good early childhood education. Well, that was kind of obvious for me from the get-go, right? I had been writing about early education. And I'd gotten there because at a gathering of university presidents, all the presidents of all the major universities were there, the big research universities. And I'd written this book on the marketing of higher education. And hearing the interchange, I thought, these are estimable men and women. These are good guys and good folks. But it's like they're in an inner tube going down Niagara Falls. They don't know what to do. Events are proceeding much more rapidly than their capacity to control them. And at one point they started complaining. They said, we're competing with, it's not just bad enough that it's elementary and secondary schools. Now it's preschool. How can we possibly compete with them? And so I said, using my policy wonk language, if you had $1 extra to spend? Would you spend it on the university or would you spend it on preschool? And they all got the point. They all got the point. The huge, enormous importance of preschool. So here's my little political announcement. I think it's sad that Wyoming should be one of the 10 states in the country that does not have a state-supported preschool program. It's sad. It puts the state at an enormous competitive disadvantage down the road. This is when kids are learning enormously. Any of you kindergarten, first, second grade teachers? Yeah, some of you in the room? Okay. Well, you know, kids who come from preschool to kindergarten are just different from kids who sort of land there. And certainly kids who come to first grade for the first time. I mean, they know not only have they've gone to a good, serious preschool with real trained teachers in that room and a real curriculum that really has been shown to work. You know, they know, you know, many of them are beginning to read. They know letters, they know numbers, but they're problem solvers. The interesting ones are problem solvers. I was watching a teacher, you know, looking at how she was getting across letters and numbers, and she said, I do not teach A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I could teach a monkey to do that. I want these kids to be able to use the letters and use the numbers and what it is that they're doing. And watching her teach, it's just phenomenal. Steve Bialystock will love this. The last lesson I sat in on hers was in December of last year, and as I walked into the classroom, they were the day's activity was to make potato pancakes, potato latkes, as they say. And from the picking up of the potato to the fine and gross motor skills involved in measuring and peeling, to learning that you can make mistakes. The potato drops on the floor. She said, sure, potatoes always drop on the floor in my house. You just take them up and rinse them off and back you go. To watching what happens when the water comes out of the potato as you're all the way through the cooking of that potato. Every moment. This is not the teachable moment. This is like the teachable nanosecond in this class. And I thought, you know, I've worked my way up the education ladder. I wish that teachers teach like this through 3rd and 4th grade, and they somehow stop. I wish people took lessons from this. Watching those kids learn reminded me of, you know, who they are. There's an expression that people talk about children as empty vessels into which you pour knowledge. I hate that image. Do you think, you know, I hope you're not sort of sitting there with your little holes in your heads while I'm pouring knowledge in. They're explorers, they're adventurers, they are Lewis's and Clarks. Give them things that they can learn from and help them in that learning and watch them go. It's a phenomenal experience. So, of the 5 items in the Kids First agenda, high quality early education, valuable to all kids, is clearly the most expensive. It's also the one in which the data show the most powerful and profound long-term impact. Back to that study I was mentioning before, which is called Perry Preschool. 1963, 124 children signed up for a preschool program before Head Start. There were only spaces for half of them. So voila, a natural experiment. They pick half of them randomly. They get 2 years of preschool. One group, the other group gets nothing, presumably. And they followed these 3-year-olds all the way into their 40s. And here's what they found. It's kind of interesting, just in case preschool actually does take root here and impatient legislators want to see results. So what they found is at grade 3, the bump up in IQ scores that they had shown right after preschool had disappeared. At grade 3, you couldn't tell the difference between the Perry preschool kids and the other kids. But then you began to see, as schooling went on, you began to see effects. Significantly, and I mean that in the statistical sense, statistically significantly fewer kids were left behind. It's a nice tune. Does somebody want to catch it? It's a very, by the way, really for the wonks. Because this is a tiny sample, to get a result that is statistically significant is pretty remarkable. We're talking about big differences. Fewer kids left behind, fewer kids assigned to special ed, more kids graduating from high school, statistically significantly more kids. By that point, the labor economists are paying attention because this is a big marker of success. More kids going to college, staying out of prison, staying off welfare, being healthier, being in stable relationships, and earning, on average, a third more than the kids who otherwise exactly the same had not gone to preschool. You know, and then when the economists tried to analyze, so how much does that translate in terms of benefits for every dollar we spend, the estimates range from 4 to 1 to 7 to 1 to 17 to 1. Now, 17 to 1 always struck me as too good to be true. It doesn't matter. 4 to 1. If somebody told you right now, 2011, you get 4 to 1 on your investment, you'd say, is your name Bernie Madoff? You know? It's pretty impressive stuff. So I don't normally turn this part of the presentation into a political pitch, but I will. And this is, I say political, I don't mean partisan. The state, do you know the state which has the most impressive preschool program in the country? Anybody? Anybody who's not a ringer in this field? No. Oklahoma. Oklahoma. It's a great program. Arkansas, Tennessee. These are not, you know, the states that you think of as the cutting-edge innovator states. West Virginia, right? And they're investing because they see it making a difference in the lives of these kids. It has other effects as well. This is not just about turning out brainier kids. It's also about helping kids as they find themselves socially and emotionally. Learning to wait your turn. Learning to use your words, right? Learning to regulate your emotions. When I was a kid, the report card I would take home had a little line that said, works and plays well with others. I wish my colleagues had that line on their report cards. It would be great. But that's what this is. And that's just a nice thing that kids, you know, it's not just, it's lovely for the first grade teacher that the kids actually aren't always running around the room. But there's a study done of a large population of kids, which they had data on a test of cognition and a test of social emotional skills at age 3, and then looked at those kids at age 17. And what they found was the kids who scored really high on the cognitive tests did somewhat better than the kids who scored really high on the social emotional tests. Not as much as you might think, but higher. But the kids who scored highest on the social emotional tests at age 17 were much less likely to have wound up in jail, using drugs, using alcohol, getting pregnant, all those other things, you know, that people, liberal, conservative, whatever, ought to make happen. I'm going to come back to politics because I think it's the missing part of politics and policy. It's the missing part of the story. Because I don't want to let you guys off the hook nodding and thinking this is all a good thing. I want you to be thinking about, if you like any of this, what you might do to make it happen. So, strong parenting support, really good early education. Connect rigorous academic schooling with the resources of the surrounding community. As you know, there is an endless fight going on between the folks who insist that all it takes for kids to succeed is a really, really good teacher. If only you could get a Teach for America teacher in every classroom and a Principals Academy principal in every school, that'd be it. Nothing else would have to happen. And folks who say no, there really is more to education. There's a lot more to education than that. So in New Jersey, arid is a word on the second grade exam. I think this is an arid debate. I mean, I'll just postulate that academic rigor, getting kids to think, is something that everybody wants to have happen. But, you know, the school that's open 8 to 3, 180 days a year, and is focused entirely on academics is missing so much. You know, kids, one of the practical reasons kids need good preschool is that moms are going to work by the time their kids are 6 months old, whatever their position on the social ladder is. Poor moms, middle class moms, wealthy moms, on average, they're back on the job front. Something has to happen with those kids. And they're working. So, you know, if the school opens at 8 and the parents are going to work earlier, what to do? And if the school shuts at 3 and parents aren't getting home till, mom isn't getting home till 5 or 6, what's to be done? So that's a very pragmatic reason, at least to have some opportunities there. But you can use those moments. You can use the early morning time